It's not to be like the world, and not to be like the great majority of American Christians, but to be like Jesus Christ. I don't know why you're clapping. I'm talking about you.
What's wrong with you people? I'm serious.
You can't say amen, you ought to say ouch.
Hello, humble bees. Welcome to Tulips and Honey.
Well, welcome back, Tulips and Honey listeners. I am your host, Lauren, and today I am joined by two wonderful, wonderful brothers and sisters in Christ. I am so thankful to have you both on here, Nancy and Gordy. So you guys both were missionaries over in Paraguay, and you guys spent quite a bit of time over there, and I'm fascinated by the entire story. I can't wait to get into the details of it, because when you got there, they didn't even have a written language. To consider the fact that you had to start from basically complete scratch with sharing the Bible and putting it in their words, just mind-blowing. And if anybody is listening that wants an even longer amount of information from this, actually, Pastor Jim from Kootenai Community Church has done a 3-part interview with you guys. So I will make sure to link to that down below. So if anybody is listening wants more information about it, you guys can get that there. But you guys, I'm so thankful for you guys joining me. And if you would start with your testimonies, that would just be such a tremendous blessing.
Sure. I'll start first, and then she can kind of get the idea. I came from California, a small church in Southern California. My pastor recommended I go to Bible school, so I did. This was after I'd been saved already since I was a youngster. And this was already college age when I started out. So I went to the school that he recommended, which was Prairie Bible Institute in Canada. And for me to go from Southern California up to the cold winters of Canada was absolutely different, actually. But went up there, attended 4 years of Bible school and graduated, but met my wife there as well, Nancy. And she was we were both in the same year, and we both graduated together. And then after Bible school, got married and went into what was at that time called New Tribes Mission Training Center in Canada, also in Ontario. We spent a year and a half there. And after that, then we prepared to go to the field of Paraguay. And we already knew at that time that we were going to Paraguay together.
Okay. Well, I came from Indiana, and I was saved when I was real young. My mother raised 5 of us kids without a dad. He died when I was 6 years old. And when we were growing up, my mother encouraged us in the Lord and encouraged us in missions, had many missionaries over, and our church was just very much involved in missions. And then we took off and went out to Idaho, and we're close to Prairie Bible Institute, which was we were only 100 miles from the Canadian border, but a little bit further up there to the Bible school. And we went up to the Bible school. And that is, like he said, where we met up there. And that's where we also heard about New Tribes Mission. And they encourage you up there to be involved in missions. And that's pretty what they were thinking of a lot was missions and going into full-time service. So we both got interested in it and got married and took off, and that's where we were.
I might add too, Lauren, that before my pastor recommended a Bible school, I was already interested in missions as well. This was one of the things that Nancy and I drew us together. We were both, from the time we were little, very interested in what was going on in different mission fields. I had no idea where, but it was just that idea.
Wow. Oh, that is so neat. So you guys met there, and did you get married while you were still in school, or how did that work?
Well, it was difficult.
At that particular time, they had a lot of regulations and rules. We couldn't even talk together while we were there, but we could smile. And in the summertime, together as well. So we got to know each other then.
Oh, that's so sweet.
In the summertime, we got to know each other and found out a lot of things, that we were very much interested in missions.
Love-like in many ways.
Oh, that is so sweet. I love that about that school, that they recognized how important it was to keep the two groups separate. I mean, a lot of even so-called Christian schools these days don't actually worry about that. When my husband was actually being recruited, whenever he started to go to college away from home, we were dating, and he tried several different Christian schools, and they would allow co-dorms and stuff like that. And he was like, oh, no, no, I don't think so. And I also was like, no, I don't think that's a good idea. So I wasn't going to be going to college with him. So I was like, I don't think you should live in a dorm with a girl. That's probably a bad idea. So it's nice to hear that there was a time when things were a little bit more restricted. So you guys, you get married and you know you're going to become missionaries. Were there any other countries that y'all had thought about beforehand? And how did y'all end up deciding on Paraguay?
While we were still in the training after Bible school during the year and a half in missions training, we had a family that had been on the field visiting the field of Paraguay. And they came back, they showed slides, and right then we said, that's where we're going. And so we had any question. We had another country ask us if we would be interested in coming there, but we had already bought our tickets at that time to Paraguay. So
it was too late at that point.
Late.
Was there anything in the pictures that made you feel like that was the country that you guys wanted to go to, or was it just that was a need that you wanted to fill?
I think it's kind of both. I think, don't you?
A little bit of that. I think there was one little thing in the back of my mind that I liked about Paraguay than in other ones, and that is that they allowed homeschooling. You didn't have to send your kid away to a boarding school.
Oh wow, yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and see, back then, most people had to go to boarding schools or something, because what are you supposed to do? You're out in a village with people, but I didn't want somebody else to raise my kids.
Yeah, boarding school. Wow, I mean that's kind of foreign for us here in America. I'm sure in other countries it's natural, but
a lot of it's changed too, Lauren, because they have since after many years they recognize that homeschooling, even on mission stations and missions, was a much easier way to handle the whole situation.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I homeschool my daughter, so that's kind of neat to hear that
cool.
They've seen a little bit of a difference there, because I couldn't imagine being away from her for any given amount of time, much less a full season of schooling. So, you guys, when you get over there, I loved this listening to your interview with Jim. Nancy, you already had a child, right? You were bringing a baby and having more children. Can you go through a little bit of what that was like?
Well, when we got on the airplane, I was 7 months pregnant with my second one.
Wow. How long was that flight?
It was...
Oh, that one, at that time, I think it was like 20 hours, maybe 22 hours.
It's back before they put limits on when you could be on an airplane. Yeah. Because I had about 6 weeks later.
Wow.
So 18 months apart.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's good. That having them close like that probably helps, especially if you're over there where there's not a lot of other children to hang out with. So you had to stay on that airplane for 22 hours. Did you guys do a lot of coming back and forth in that? And if so, is there a way where we can be a blessing to our missionaries when we know they're going to be flying back and forth? Is there something that you guys could have used at that time that would make it easier?
Well, back then we stayed 5 or 6 years, and they don't do that as much anymore. It's more like 4 years. Sometimes it's even less. Like our son comes back and forth every 2 years, something like. It makes it a lot easier. You don't take as long a furlough, and we didn't like the business of coming all the way back here for a whole year and then going back to a language that we hadn't heard for a whole year. So that made it a little hard. But yeah, we did that at the beginning, and it worked out fine, but we pretty well stopped doing that after a couple of furloughs, we realized. And then the kids weren't always thrilled to go back and interrupt their life like that too. So it changed a little bit from,
5 years and 6 years one time, 5 years another time, and then it went to 3, and then it went down to 2 years after that.
And once our kids started having marriages and babies, it was quite often.
Then it was quite often. Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Which
yes.
Unheard of before, because flying it started out just before us. They only got boats, but it was not an easy thing to do back then. But for us, we got there at the time when it started getting a little bit
easier to travel. And we're talking about the late 70s, 80s, and 90s. So by that time, air travel was pretty much the accepted thing anyway.
Oh yeah, okay. I love whenever I watch at Christmas time. We always watch those older movies, and there's
Yeah.
White Christmas where they're talking about how horrible it would be to have to take a flight. Like, oh, a flight? No, why would we want to do that when we could take a train? I thought that was so cute. Like, but nobody thinks that way now. But I've only ever been out of the country one time when I was very young, and I was visiting a family member that lived in El Paso, Texas. So we just traveled across the border for a few hours and came back. But I know a lot has changed nowadays for, of course, after 9/11, but did you guys have to take any kind of like shots or anything to make sure that you didn't get sick while y'all were over there? And how does that work with missionaries?
The country we went into did require smallpox vaccination, and
Depends on the country.
it all depends on the country. I think a TB shot as well, or TB test. That was it back then. And of course, we carried our shot records with us, and the kids all had this little book they carried around. But we were never asked for it except when we first entered the country. And Paraguay is not a hard country to walk into. So back in those days, you got your visa right at the airport, and you walked right in. And then later on, you went and did the paperwork to get it permanent later, which we did as well. But the first initial, and even today, to this day, it's still you get your visa at the airport and you walk in. So it's very
Wow.
easy to get in. Some of it's, I mean, it's not expensive as some countries. You do pay a fee, but it's not bad. And by the way, while we're on this subject, we are heading back to Paraguay in 6 weeks for a
Wow.
3-week visit to see the Indian folk again, and to see our two families, our two sons that are with their families that are still living down there. So we're gonna go back down. We're getting excited about it.
Oh wow, that is so neat. How long has it been since you've been there?
Almost 2 years. Has it been longer than that? Yeah, a little longer than 2 years.
About 3.
Oh wow. I mean, I'm sure your grandbabies. It's got to be difficult to not be around your grandbabies. But you guys, when you went down there, your sons now, right? Because you have 5 children, three sons, 2 girls, right?
Right.
Some of them are still down there, correct?
2 sons, and all the grandbabies are not grandbabies anymore. They're married now.
We got
Almost all of them.
5 of them married, and 2. There's actually one's graduating. We're going to go down and see him graduate, and then he's coming back. And then there's one down there married,
Yeah.
and then the last one he's like 16.
Yeah,
And so she's
15
got a
or
couple of
16.
more years.
Wow. Are you guys going to get some
So-
great grandbabies soon?
We already have great grandbabies. We got one and then one on the way.
But they're in the States.
But we
They're here.
also have a year-old grandson. So we've got them spread out from 1 year old to 25 years old.
That is so great. Oh wow. So your cup runneth over with these babies and grandbabies. That is so fun. Wow. That is really neat. I'm sure going back now, things are really different than how it was when you first went over there. What was it like stepping into that country then as compared to what it's like now? And how did you develop the language?
Those are 2 questions. Let's see. Stepping into the country at the very beginning was a shock. We went from the major airport in Los Angeles, which was already a sprawling metropolis, and you land in this little tiny airport with a little tower, and you didn't even have the gate was just, you step down a ladder, kind of like a stairway down, and we're on asphalt with holes in it. You get in the little van to take you to the guest house, and there's cattle walking across the major highway, which isn't really a highway. Everything was just way, way, way lower than we were used to as far as the economy. We had a hard time finding what we thought was food in the grocery stores because everything was just in bulk. So we didn't know. There were boxes of
No such thing.
hamburger helper and whatnot, and you couldn't find anything. But the missionaries that were already there did help quite a bit, and they helped us to adapt. But it was interesting. And then we, of course, Nancy mentioned already that we did have our second child born just a few weeks after that, and there was no paper diapers at that time. We were waiting on stuff to be shipped down, so we didn't have even our own diapers in the shipped with us. So we had one of the missionary ladies
Made us some.
made cloth diapers for him. So it was an adventure.
And that city that we went to was a huge one.
It was a big city.
It's a big city, but it's just very much cobblestone or dirt roads.
At that
wow.
time. Now it's a far more
Huge.
progressive city now, but at that time we were talking about 50 years ago. So
Almost. We're not quite that old.
45 years ago.
Don't add any years to it, right? So that's really fascinating. So you guys, you get there. Obviously, you have to take several years of training to do this. But when you get to the actual village, were you received well by the people?
Yeah, I'd say so, because they already had two missionary families that had been living with them for 2 years already. And so we were just kind of like, we came in and we started as well with them. But the language was they didn't speak any Spanish and couldn't use the Spanish we'd learned. All they spoke was their own language. So we actually started out in Paraguay learning the Spanish language for a year and a half.
Long
before
enough
we
to
went-
have another baby.
Yeah, we had another baby. From there, then into the tribe, and found out real quick that they didn't understand a word we were saying.
Wow.
That's where it was kind of abrupt.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
all that training.
Yeah.
We moved out to the tribe with 3 children under 3 years of age it was a very tribal situation, into a house, and the Indians were very friendly.
They were friendly.
They loved our kids, loved us, and
I don't think why exactly we were there, because we couldn't tell them, we're here to bring you this other story. I mean, they already had their own religion. Why would they want another one,
Right.
But so it took a while to learn the language. And the other missionaries that were already there had been trying to break down the language a little bit, and they were there, but they still were misunderstood. And so they were always expecting us to give them clothes and food. That's all they thought we were there for.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So they didn't even realize at first that you guys were there to share the gospel. Wow. How long did it take to get to that point where they understood that you were there to tell them something?
I'd say probably 4 or 5 years, maybe 4 years. By the time
they understood while we were there.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure.
Before Jamie and Jeff left to go to Bible school.
Oh yeah, long before then. Yeah, but it was not still completely understood, I think, because as we would go up and learn the language, we'd sit and visit with them. I would always go and spend time with one or two of the older men there, and to learn the language and practice. And we actually would tell them things about God and try to find out what they understood was what if they had a God. And so we were already beginning to communicate the gospel anyway. It's just that they didn't know that that's the real only reason we came.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's
Were
why
they used
it's just kind of
to-
developed.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Because, I mean, you guys, I'm sure there's a difference in the way that everybody looks. And so you're here, you've got some food, you got some clothes. That makes sense. But this tribe, they are completely separated right from at that time from technology or from the bigger cities. Was that a choice that they decided they didn't want to mingle, or what kept them there separated?
Distance. I think distance mostly. For us to get out to this tribe from the last town, even in the country, was another, I'd say 90 kilometers, which would be about 50 miles from the nearest town. And the only way they could get there would be to walk. And they're not going to just get up and walk to a town, not 50 miles. It would take them 2 days, 3 days. So there were those that had done it. But for the most part, they were just isolated, mostly because of the distance and the food that was even there.
Wow, that is fascinating. How many people were there in the tribe when you got there?
300, 350 probably, that we knew of. There was others in other isolated places, but only small pockets of and they were actually most of them were in Bolivia or in Argentina, not in Paraguay, which where we met the Indians and worked with them was only as the crow flies about 50 miles away from the Bolivian and Argentine borders.
Wow. Could
the
you
Northwest.
travel at that time across the countries, or was that already restricted?
No, it was just that the roads were so bad. It was just a dirt road that went all the way to the border into Argentina, and you would have to go on a boat to cross over the river. That it was the border into Argentina, and
Okay.
travel just wasn't by horseback. Sometimes we
Wow.
didn't even have a vehicle for the first few years. We always, to get our supplies in, even where we were, we had to use an airplane. That's how I.
Wow.
But now, like I said, we're still talking a long time ago. Now the roads are better, though some of the roads are still just as bad, but the roads are better. There's even an asphalt road highway now that goes over it where we used to go if we wanted to cross into Argentina. We could catch that highway and then go in a vehicle. But back then it was pretty isolated, and that's why the Indians were isolated.
Okay, that makes sense. Wow. Now that things have developed, are they still keeping their language and keeping their culture, or have they sort of started like picking up on cell phones and internet and stuff?
Well, they've started learning Spanish, so some of them are becoming more bilingual. For the most part, though, they're still definitely maintain their language. They like speaking their own language. They like when others learn their language. So they really enjoyed it when we started learning their language, and to this day they still like that. They're not losing their language,
Oh, that's good.
not a bit. No.
Wow, that's really cool. And that's great. A great way to reach them then, that you guys took the time to really learn their language and understand it. Were they really grateful for you guys creating the written language, and did they understand the necessity of that?
Not at the time, but they do now because I've had guys since then, years later, tell me we sure appreciate knowing how to read. We can read, and now reading their own language, then now they can actually start to read a little bit of Spanish publications as well. They don't get much, but they do. They can read a little bit, but reading
Okay.
they do well.
I hadn't even considered until just now with you saying that would mean that they couldn't read like any other stuff like Charles Spurgeon and stuff. None of that stuff is going to be in their language. So Pilgrim's Progress and all the books that we love,
That's right. They
they
don't have.
wouldn't. Wow, that's a very different way of living. But it took you a long time, right, to get their actual language written down. You said something in that interview with Jim about phonics or something, and I can't remember, but it was like writing down the consonants. Is that the right word? Consonants?
Oh, it was actually every single sound that they made.
That's it.
We had a symbol for it that we'd learned in our training, and so we could actually take every sound and write it out. But it was called phonetics. It was a phonetic symbol. That's the word you're looking for. It was phonetics.
Yeah.
We would take those words. We didn't know they were words. I mean, they could talk for a minute, and you never knew where the breaks were, what was connected to, what the suffixes, affixes, all the grammar. We didn't have a clue, and they didn't know either. They couldn't tell us what their grammar was. In other words, that's what my job was as a linguist, was to decide what they really heard from those sounds, and what they didn't hear, because it was a part of their system, and you had to decide. And that's how we created a written language from their spoken language. And if there's linguists that are listening to this, they would understand that far better, where you take a language and turn it into a written language. We gave an alphabet, and we stuck with the Spanish symbols because that way we knew eventually they were going to read Spanish.
Okay.
So that was the idea, was to make it simple enough and make it so that they would be able to read fast. And it actually worked. And then later, when our son came back from going through the training with his wife, they came down, and he actually taught them how to read a lot better than we could. He had more training than we did. So he actually used the books and made the books. You worked on it as well, Nancy, and he worked together and made books that they could learn their own language with. So that's how they learned to read.
Wow.
It took, the first 5 years that we were down there was just to get that language into writing and to learn the language. And after that's when everything else took off.
Wow, that is really impressive. And of course your children, they basically grew up with that language.
Right.
was it easier for them to pick up the differences in the different words and stuff? Because my daughter can learn all kinds of crazy stuff that it just leaves my brain immediately. These children, they're like sponges.
Yeah. Yeah, they learned it very well.
Yeah,
All our children learned to speak Manhui very well.
That is so neat. Now, Nancy, while he was figuring all of this out, were you learning alongside him? And how did you guys both end up learning the language? Was it the same for both of you?
No, not really, because I tried to learn it. I had friends that were helping me, but I also had to teach 5 kids school. So, there's enough difference between the boys and the girls. There's 4 years. So, I started out with the 3, but I don't think until later when the girls got a little bit bigger that I really got more involved in the language.
That makes sense. Did that actually, for the people, for the tribe members, did that separate you from them, or did they try to still make you feel included? How did that work?
No, I was always included. It's just that I would go up there and talk like a, I don't know, 2-year-old or something, but they loved it. And they wanted me to be there, and they didn't care how I spoke. So I was with them all the time, doing things from the time the kids were little. Spent a lot of time with the Indians, but never, I couldn't carry on really big conversations because I was still learning the language. But once I did, I just didn't grammatically learn quite as well as I should have.
Yeah, and we learned different areas of language. She learned the women's, the food names, and
they're weaving their little bags,
all the little
stuff
things
like
that
that.
I didn't learn those things. She learned what even the stripes on a squash are called, and
Wow.
the descriptions. And whereas I never learned, I learned the names of trees and birds and stuff and of course, you learned the kinship relationship terms far better than I did, because those were what the ladies were interested in. But together, we could put all that together as we developed dictionaries, and so we could teach each other some of it.
Wow. That is so great that God used you both like that. The Indians, as you guys were learning their language and all that, they seemed like they were actually really friendly. I think a lot of people back here in the States and in the Western world have a sort of viewpoint of, when we hear tribes, that don't speak languages, that you can't write it all down and things like that. We sort of think of like maybe the Elliots and how, dangerous that was. But it's encouraging to hear that these people actually were really friendly and happy to have y'all there. What religion did they have? That was that a part of just their raising, or how did they come to be so welcoming?
I don't know if it'd exactly be welcoming. We were quite entertaining to them.
We were their whole Sunday night movie,
Entertainment for them and everything. But I think they were just naturally very friendly.
They were friendly people.
It's like personalities. There's another tribe that, I don't know, maybe 100 miles or so away from where the Manhui were, that used to come down and war on the Manhui, and they were vicious and killed white people and killed the Paraguayans and everybody around them until they, had to quit. But the Manhui weren't like that. They weren't an aggressive group of people,
and they were very fun-loving. They would always be telling jokes. One of their humor is actually, they would take a word that you would say, and they would flip it a little bit and make it sound differently, and everybody just laugh, and then they'd make it say something else. And we all got names by our characteristics. Like I was called the Stick because I was very skinny at the time. I was called the Stick. That was my name. And Nancy, because her hair turned gray prematurely, she was called the Old Lady. And all their kids had funny names. They were one kid, because he fell out of a tree, so he was called Falling Out of a Tree. It was a short name, but what he was called. Just they were funny people, and they had a good time about that. It was always joking.
But they were also a very fearful
but they were seriously fearful as well. And that was, you asked about their religion. They were very, very religious in a sense, but it's what we would call animism, which means they felt that spirits were in everything. If a man did fall out of a tree, spirit caused it. If a man was bit by a pig, the spirits caused it. If they had dreams, they were caused by the spirits. They saw the shooting stars at night, they were evil spirits falling down. They were afraid of the rainbow. They were afraid because the rainbow was a serpent. It was a spirit serpent. Everything.
They were afraid of the night.
And the night, at night, if we had people around visiting at night, they were gone because they were afraid of the dark. They had to get by with fire. The fire kept the spirits at bay. And so it's just all kinds of fear. That was one of the things when we finally did have believers that they told us later on, we were afraid of everything. And it was Satan causing us to be afraid. We know now that God's out there, and he's the one in these spirits away. So, but they're far more spiritual than we are, I'll tell you, because of it.
I bet so. How do they react to that? And I guess maybe a better question is that how long did it take after you guys were able to explain the gospel? How long did it take before they actually started to understand and believe what you were telling them?
It took, I think, probably at least a couple of years to go through. What we did was we went through the whole story of the narrative from Genesis all the way up to the life of Christ. You had to do it twice, maybe more, very slowly. Weekly stories that we would tell, and with application, of course, explaining who God was, why things are the way they are, what sin is. But it took from Genesis all the way up, and we did it 2 times before we had 3 men who finally sort of understood. And we went through it 2 more times with them and then with others to help them understand. They actually, it was about the 3rd time through that they actually entered into the stories themselves. Oh, that's us. We're just like that. We didn't know before that what even sin was. Their whole idea of doing wrong was getting angry and being stingy. That was sin. Those are the only things. And the Word of God doesn't even talk about those as being, the 10 commandments. And so it was a completely different understanding of everything for them. And when we did finally have those 3 guys and then others later, they would come back and they'd say, this is how we understood it. Now we understand it so much more clear. And now we know it is.
Did that really shift things whenever you had somebody that was an Indian that now is a believer, that they could then go and explain things maybe a little bit easier to everyone else? Did that help? I mean, if somebody's listening to this and they're a missionary and they're sort of flailing and maybe feeling, wow, it's been 5 years, because that's a long period of time, and then to keep explaining it, I'm sure it can be very discouraging. Did that help shift things? And is that
yes. Yes.
Okay, that made a big difference?
I can remember with our coworkers, like we were 3 families at the time working together in the same little area with these people teaching. And I remember sitting after one night of sharing all the way through the gospel. Not a single person responded. And we thought, what's wrong? Should we stay or should we move on to another tribe? We actually had thoughts, because nobody, I think part of it was our own communication, but it was the fact that we're talking about darkness here, real spiritual darkness. And so there was no response those first few times until finally we got one of those 3 guys, and then they could say, this is what, and then they could explain it to their families and to their friends. This is what it is. And it wasn't that we were miscommunicating that much. It was just that it was that much darkness there, I think. And fear, a lot of fear.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Did they respond with it? Well, I guess you said anger was actually a sin for them. So they probably weren't angry that these people were changing their mind, but was there any sense that they thought if you believed what the Bible said that the spirits were going to be upset or retaliate?
I wouldn't doubt it.
I think there was a couple families that felt that way. Yeah.
There was, we still have some families from the beginning that have never been saved. They refuse and they say it's not right. Many of the other ones do, but like with one family that I can think of, they they accepted it, but they didn't know for sure, kind of thing. Yeah. And it just took a while. But I think in the end, what it all boils down to is it's the Holy Spirit that works in their hearts. Right. And I think that is what he did, was he worked in their hearts. It wasn't anything necessarily that we could present it any better or any worse, because we made mistakes in everything, but it was the Holy Spirit that started working in their hearts. And
Well, that's what they told us too. I mean, it's, that God has really showed us that we were blind, is what a lot of them said. Yeah, we didn't understand, but it's not that you didn't say it right. It was just we just didn't understand it, and that's like she says, God did it, not us.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so true, and it's a global humanity issue, right? Because
Right, you're right.
we all hear the gospel here in America just constantly, and so many. Even I was in church for over a decade before I even was saved. So it's fascinating that no matter where you're at, the Holy Spirit is the one that's going to do this work.
Right.
What did you do to actually get it written down, though, the scripture? Because I know it's the hearing of God's word. So at first, I guess you'd mentioned that you were going through the story. Was that just your word of mouth? You were saying it, and then you started having it written down?
We actually never thought I was going to be a translator. Okay, we thought we were going to be Bible teachers and pioneer missionaries, and all of a sudden, as we were teaching, I think it just kind of came to the realization, you know what? We need to translate. We need to get God's word into their hands in their own language, because they're going to forget the audio and they're going to corrupt it terrible. And I mean, the game of telephone. What happens if you pass something on audio? What happens after it goes around the circle? And so we're always thinking this. They're not going to remember these stories. They've got to have it written down. And so that's when I started translating Genesis. It was way back. I mean, it's years ago now. And as we were teaching, I think it was the second time through, then the teacher, I wasn't teaching at that time. I started translating. So the teacher, the other family, took the scriptures that were translating, and he was using them to teach with and showing them the book as well. This is what it says here. You can't read it yet, but you will eventually. But this is what it says, and I'm going to read it. And then he would read what we had translated, and we went right on through, and we just kind of fell into the work basically. But after a while, we realized this was what God had directed, and so I went and took further training as far as a translator as well. It took a couple of different times in the States to get some more training to become a good translator. And so then that was my only job after that, was translating. But before that, it was just Bible teaching. But it kind of just kind of happened, but it wasn't. It was God kind of directing us in those ways.
And then I grew up and started teaching them on Hui too.
Yeah, and then now my son, the oldest son, Jamie, and his wife and family, when they came back down, he also fit right into the work there in the Manhui, and he helped in the translation. In fact, he did. I think he did 6 of the New Testament, no, 5 of the New Testament books and a couple of the Old Testament books. That was his job until they moved to another tribe. So we actually didn't do it all by ourselves.
No, and then Jeff came along, and I would say he's been the major Bible teacher.
Yeah, as far as Bible teaching, now Jeff
he's done there.
And his family are still down there in the Manhui work, and he is still to this day teaching the teachers how to teach. Basically, is what he's doing.
Wow, that is amazing.
It's
Because then,
project.
yeah, did the translation of these tribes, does it work with all the other tribes nearby? Like the languages, are they similar enough?
No, it doesn't work. They're far enough.
No.
I know. We thought maybe years ago that we could do that, use it, because there's in this language group with the Manhui, there's 4 other language groups that are similar. Their grammar's tied together. They even have a few words of the same, but they have to speak Spanish if they want to communicate with these other tribal groups.
Wow.
So they use their own language. Now, there's one group that's closer, the one that Jamie works in now. Those people can understand some of the Manhui, and some of the Manhui people can learn, but they still use Spanish to communicate. So that's how far apart the languages are. They're kind of like Spanish and French and Portuguese and English, kind of in that similarity, but that's not very close.
Wow. Can you say something in that language so that we can hear what it sounds like?
A vuelta que ya estaba hecho y hey ya estaba todavía.
No, that was Spanish.
I can throw some Spanish in there too.
It doesn't sound like any other language that I've ever heard. Wow.
Counting.
No.
And what does that mean?
Said he's not used to speaking it.
Time I spoke some was over the telephone to one of my Manhui friends, and it's been a while. And when we go back in 6 weeks, it's going to take a while to get back into it. I'll be able to understand much faster than I can speak it.
Wow.
They'll love to be laughed at because they'll laugh at much.
They love laughing at us, and they will. That's okay.
Oh wow! So I guess you've got to be pretty humble if you're going over there and they're gonna tease about things.
We know they love us, so who cares if we can or can't speak, and they think it's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it nowadays? Like, do they at least have running water or electricity there, or is it still pretty far out?
They actually do have electricity now. They've had it for the last about 8 years or so. The government put wires in, and so they all strung their own little light bulbs up and hooked interconnected to all the houses, and shocks on it sometimes. But they have electricity now, and they also have
no running water.
No, well, they have to get their water out of a well still, and they bucket it to their houses. But they do have cell phones, and they have motorcycles and bicycles, and there's one guy even has a truck, or at least he had one. I don't know how long it lasted. They've learned how to take care of those things quite well as well. They become their own mechanics, and they're quick to learn some of those things.
That is so crazy.
They're very smart people. Yeah.
Wow. When you guys got out there, they didn't have any of those types of conveniences. Did they at least have a well, or did y'all have to figure that kind of stuff out?
We dug the well for them. We dug 2 wells, one for one half of the community, one for the other half, and then we used part of it as well for ourselves.
Oh wow! I bet they were really grateful for that.
Well, they didn't really know any difference between well water and water that was sitting on the ground in a big puddle anyway. So it took them a while to learn that.
You know what? Being grateful often has to be taught.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely.
It does. We have seen them accept a load of grapefruit from a town in town that had too many and sent them out. And we've seen them get angry because some of these are rotten.
Yeah. They are learning to become thankful,
Right.
but they have also taught us how to be thankful. Just as an illustration, the last time we were down there visiting, I says, well, I said, are you going to continue to save your money, or do you need anything else? He says, I have everything I need. I have my grandkids. I have a roof over my head. I have my beautiful wife, and I have my fire. And he says, what else do I need?
Oh, wow.
Very content. They are very content. But thankfulness, being grateful for something, is not something that you come by naturally.
No.
We are taught it from the time we're little.
And they
say thank you to your grandma. Say thank you to.
Right.
We're taught it.
And you have to have a value, like a price on things to understand, you're grateful for these grapefruits because somebody worked really hard to plant them. And
doesn't work that way.
They don't.
They didn't understand that. In fact, to this day, I don't think they understand the value of one thing over another. And there's no word in language to say value, and there's no word in their language to say thank you. Okay, so that's something to get through. There's no word for grace or faith, or a lot of these words just don't have. Those are the things that we had to go through in order to.
So they're big, long phrases.
Yeah, they're big action words. They are. We can say it. It's just not with one little word.
Oh, so you had to really sort of create the idea of these things, or did they have the idea? They just didn't have a word for it.
They have a word for most things, but a lot of things they had to be taught. I can remember back in Timothy years ago when we were working through the translation, we came across the idea of where Paul tells Timothy to teach the ladies to I think it's not the idea of morals, it's the idea of how to dress properly. Modesty, that's the word. I was trying to think of the word. And they hadn't a clue what it meant to be modest. but their idea of modesty is so different from ours. Our women, our missionary ladies, would wear pants all the time, or a skirt or a pants, but the Manhui ladies would never step into a pair of pants. Now, were we more modest or were they more modest?
I think it was mostly because the guys took the pants.
Well, that but yeah, I think you're right on that one. But their idea of modesty was different. We finally translated the idea of modesty was what Paul told Timothy to tell the women to not wear clothes that would draw attention to themselves and cause their men to stumble.
That makes sense.
That's the idea. And I guess that's modesty, but it's always different in every culture, for sure.
Yeah, it's just interesting. They were a very modest people.
They were modest in their own way.
I would take my friends when they had something happen to them and they had to go into the hospital, broken arm or whatever, and the women would always wear a little skirt and never take it off. They took a shower in that thing.
Oh, wow.
They're going to go starkers anywhere. So that to them was modesty, and they just always did. Their little kids were okay up to a while, but
well, when we first got to the tribe back in the early 70s, none of the kids had clothes. They would just have them, and so they were running around.
Oh no!
Skin only.
Well,
and
even
it took them years before that changed.
Yeah, and if you ran into the guys hunting, they would probably hide or something, because a lot of times they wouldn't wear their clothes out hunting for fear the stickers would tear their clothes up.
Yeah, they didn't want their clothes ruined by the stickers in the woods, so they would only out on the road would they put them on.
Wow. Were there not like dangerous bugs or snakes and stuff there to worry about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's part of life.
My first thought was, I don't want to get bitten by something, so I'm going to have pants. But wow, that's fascinating.
It's more the stickers than the bugs. Yeah, I think. Yeah, it is.
They do have scorpions and different things that do and can't, but that's mostly at night.
Yeah, you learn where they are and when they're out. So and they do all those things. They taught us how to survive in the woods, basically.
I was just going to ask that next. If you guys had to do any hunting and gathering and stuff like that while you were down there.
We did that with them to be with them.
Not for our sake.
No, it's to learn their language and to be with them and to make friends with them. And it was a whole building relationship thing that we started from the very beginning. And I think they appreciated it. And that's probably why they began to listen to us, was because we were already friends.
You know, it's like you get with these people and there's a lot of adjusting in your mind. You're sitting there holding your little baby, and this little lady reaches over and touches your baby's mouth while the baby's drooling, and her finger's not clean, and there's mud going down your baby's mouth. Oh, she tries to wipe it off, and it gets muddier. You know, I just say, I'll leave it. She's okay. But they've never seen it on their own kids because they're already dirty. Or little things like that you got to just not let bother you. It's not the end of the world. Or you're sitting there drinking tea with them, and a dog.
You know what tea is?
Oh, that's the tea they drink down there. They drink tea as a group, and you all drink out of the same cup with this metal straw. But we're drinking, and this dog comes over and laps some of the water up with his tongue, and she reaches over and splashes the top part of the off so she could get all the stuff off, because the missionary lady is sitting there, and she wouldn't have otherwise. But you try not to show your surprise or whatever. You've got to accept.
Nothing surprises anymore.
No, but you have to accept it, because I've had little kids come over and pop something in my mouth, and I'm thinking, what am I eating? Strange things in my life. But they're not trying to hurt you or anything. They just want to share with you. But it's back then, it's not near like
not
this
as much
now,
anymore.
But it was a very dirty, whatever.
Yeah, I guess. No running water and things to that nature. Then.
Yeah, they didn't have really houses. See, at first, they didn't have houses. They didn't have chairs. They didn't have beds. They didn't have rugs. They didn't have clothes. I mean, you talk about living like animals in many, many ways. But as time went on, they began to realize, I think we need clothes. I think we need a roof over our heads.
They learned a little bit about hygiene
and hygiene, but you got to remember, it's a hot climate. They don't need, a lot of the things that we need in a colder climate, especially, like we are here.
Yeah.
That's why the Indians in North America are so different from the Indians in South America because of the
That
climate.
makes sense.
They don't have to wear clothes. They don't have to have a roof over their head. It only rains 3 days out of the year, just about. So it's like Arizona in a lot of ways. So
Wow. So how did they get their water then before you guys dug the wells?
they would take it out of the water holes where the rain had collected, and because the soil is so hard, the water sits there the rest of the year. And of course, it gets lily pads and stuff over it where it's shaded, so the water actually stays fairly clean underneath those lily pads. And
That's great.
obviously, they're very immune to a lot of things that we weren't.
Yeah. I was just
But
gonna ask that.
we actually got immune too, didn't we?
I think so. And it is so hot and so dry, so flat there that like when we did have visiting doctors that came down to check for parasite stuff like that. And they said out of all of the indigenous people of Paraguay, the Manhui were probably the least of carrying that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the least problems with skin.
Because it's not humid. Humidity really breeds a lot of groshy stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas
Dry
it's so dry there, stuff can't really.
It doesn't breed. Yeah.
That makes sense.
You still
kind of
do
a
have
blessing.
some.
I mean, they'd have skin boils and that kind of stuff from some bacteria, and their teeth were not too good, and they had a lot of eye problems. And I think the doctor said that probably some of their eye problems came from running in the woods and getting a sticker stuck in their eye.
And the smoke and everything.
And the
being
smoke,
on fire all the time. And
Yeah.
different things like
A
that.
lot
But
of different.
they're a lot better off now.
Now-
They go to town for
yeah.
medicine and they get medicine and they go to the doctor, stuff like that.
They have finally understood. Years ago, medicine was poison to them.
They were scared to death of it.
And then,
Wow.
as we taught them that medicine would help certain things, it went the other way. Then they wanted more medicine than we had to give them.
We watched little
It's
kids
balanced
die.
out now. It's quite a bit more balanced. But back in those first days, it was very hard to get some things across to them.
We watched die that we could have taken to town or
They refused to go. Yeah.
but they started learning. They're very teachable. I think.
Yeah,
They're very.
I think so. All in all, as a group.
Mhm.
Wow. I mean, it must have been really difficult at first whenever you've got so many things going on and you're trying to learn their language and you just want to be able to help them. Spiritually, we know that the gospel is the answer, and sharing that, you want to share that answer with people. And it must have been very frustrating to see them have these medical diseases and they wouldn't let you help, and spiritual fear to see somebody be afraid of everything and know that they don't need to be. I'm sure that was really difficult. What sort of encouragement do you have for folks that are maybe going through something similar as missionaries, or what helped you guys get through that sort of daily drudgery of dealing with that?
Sure, it's a good question. I mean, maybe it's just like life. You've got to start trusting the Lord and realizing this is the situation I'm in, and He's the one that's going to work in their hearts. He's the one that's got to show them, and you can do your best to try to help them understand things as each situation comes along. But you just have to be patient, because you can't get after them or get mad at them, or you're going to lose them. You can't be on top. You can't criticize them all the time. What they have done is what they feel is right. And you have to let them start deciding and let kids grow up, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not that I'm talking about the Manhui being kids, but it's just.
It was a lot like training your own kids in some ways.
In some ways, but you had to just be patient and love them and let the Lord work. I think sometimes we want to do something, we want to make it, but I think we have to quit struggling and leave it with the Lord.
We have worked with missionaries in training before they've gone to a field in our own works, in our own training centers here in the States. It's been a number of years ago now, but I can remember that most young people, I don't want to say kids, but most young people that want to go into missions have these glorified ideas that it's going to happen overnight. You know what I mean? It's the gospel. They'll just go out there and preach the gospel, and boom, they're going to be saved. It doesn't work that way. It takes years and years of building relationships, and that's probably the most important thing. You can't. It's not our job to convert a person anyway, but you can't convert somebody. You have to become their friend.
Yeah.
That's if you make that first issue, become friends, build a relationship, and after that, then they will listen to you. If you don't have an ear, you might as well give up. You can't do it. And I can remember many times we thought, I've been out, I've straight witnessed. I've tried to share the gospel with somebody next to me on an airplane, and you're not their friend. They don't have to listen to you. And so they don't.
Right.
It doesn't mean that the Lord can't do something.
Yeah. No, he does a lot. I can't say
because somebody else is already watered or something.
But we are only the waterers. About right. Yeah. And thing is patience, build relationships, and but take every opportunity you can, because you never know where you are in that line of the ones carrying the gospel. It could be something. It could be you're the final step. That's why you have to always give an answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I see the difference there between if you've only got a few minutes with somebody versus you're going to be there for years, and there's not necessarily a way for you to get back home for a while. And take your time. That makes a lot of sense. Do you have any stories of conversions or anything encouraging that happened while you were there?
Let me tell you one, though, that's not encouraging first, okay?
Sure.
Think for a second. There was this old guy that I spent many, many days and months and probably years learning the language from. He was an older fellow, and I knew I had lots of time, okay? That was in the back of my mind. We're going to be here for a while. So I didn't say much to him in the way of spiritual, but I learned from him a lot of things. Well, he got really sick. And I realized all of a sudden this guy could die before he understands the gospel. And so then the next few days I go up there to his house and then sit by the fire with him. And I started trying in my broken Manhui to share the gospel with him. And Lauren, I don't think it ever got enough in his understanding to ever even understand what I was talking about. But then I realized at that time, I need to really push with the language and really get this language quick so we won't see anybody else die before we get the gospel to them. So there was that urgency, okay, as well. But there were others. There's other stories. Now we have to think of a positive one.
Well, there was one that happened. Actually, it would be to a guy maybe close to that age. He was an older guy, and his nephew was one of the first believers. And so the older guy was dying, and his nephew had talked to him and everything and shared the gospel. And he really felt like, he was a believer. And then the night that he died, he told, he prayed for the guy, and the older guy turned to his family and said, "I'm going to heaven. I know I'm going to heaven now." And he was a believer. But it was really interesting. I went up there early in the morning when they let me know that he had died. I went up there and sat with him, and his nephew, who was probably our age, his nephew turned to me and said, "I did something I'm not sure I should have done." I said, "What did you do?" And he says, "I prayed that the Lord would take him really quick because he was in really a lot of pain." And I said, "That's a good thing." But he had no idea it was a good thing. But he says it was a good thing. And he says, then I know he was. And then that's when he told me. He told his family, his wife and his kids, "Don't mourn for me. It's okay. I am going to heaven." Wow. But, and that the nephew, he's always been our really close friend, and he's one of the, first believers, but he reached out and just, it was something, how can I put it? They are concerned for one another and stuff, but they don't show it a lot. But for him to pray in concern and compassion that his uncle wouldn't have to see too much pain was not typical of them.
No.
Why? Well, I mean, their lives are so difficult. I'm sure pain was.
They just accepted it.
Just accepted.
But for him to turn to the Lord with, "I've got something here. I'm not sure it's right, but I really pity him," and no, it's just neat to see them, building their own relationship with God. But
talking about death too, is this an interesting thing when the before and after of when we had no believers to the time we had many believers, the remarkable difference in how they viewed death. Just, it amazes it to this day. It amazes me because before, when a person would die, think that certain things had to happen. They could no longer say that person's name because if they did, a spirit could hear that and come and get them as well.
Oh,
They were very, very fearful of saying the dead person's name. The spirit world, like I say, was very, very, very real and near to them. So death was horrible. They all wailed and screamed and carried on like we've never seen when somebody would die, especially if it was a child or somebody that was well liked. They were just they just carried on for days and days. You could hear the wailing off in the distance when we were far away. But then when we had believers and a believer died, they were telling each other, encouraging each other, you don't have to cry so much because we know where that person is gone. They're in heaven now. So
it goes from being devastated to rejoicing.
It also made
yes.
our language learning really, really bad because if somebody died and your word for some cactus fruit had to change if it was close to their name.
It would change all the names of things. Yeah. So you almost had to learn 2 languages in some ways. For everything that was close to a person's name, you had to change it.
But then they stopped doing it.
But then they stopped.
And now they say dead people's names and everything.
Now it's just a complete different, just a about face now with death and with, they don't change the names anymore when people die. So it's just awesome.
Do the believers have quite an effect then on the entire tribe to whenever they see, because that's a huge difference.
There is a difference, and they do see it. I think we did have quite a bit of a high percentage of believers in the tribe as well, Lauren, and that affected the whole group. That we were always in contact with.
Yeah. I would imagine those that aren't saved and are still afraid, they won't say certain names or something.
They still
like that.
won't.
They'll still use their own little words for it, and everybody will know what it is. So they just
that makes sense
that way. But
yeah, that makes sense. What percentage of the tribe is believers now?
What'd you say? Like maybe 60% or so.
Wow.
maybe
But-
not.
Yeah,
Considering
maybe
all the
not.
kids.
Now the tribe has grown. You're talking about before we were 350 people. There's over 1,000, maybe 1,500 on Hui now. So it's hard to say how many of that of the total is now a believer. We just don't have any idea. In our little area where we worked and lived, it was like 60%. But so maybe that 60% of the whole tribe it can't be that much.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Wow, does that growth, is that corresponding to the differences in medical care and stuff like that?
I think so.
A lot of it was that, yes.
In the 3-part interview you did, I remember, Nancy, you mentioning something about the women thinking that they couldn't eat certain foods at certain times of the month. And
Right.
and there's not that much food anyways. So there were lots of things prohibiting them from being healthy.
That's
Right.
exactly right.
Wow.
And
That
don't do that. But I would still wager to say those that have openly refused the gospel and have gone on their way, which I know of some of them, I don't think they stop doing that.
They would still have all those same taboos.
Mhm.
Oh, wow. It's sad, I'm sure, to see anyone continuing to live in fear when they don't have to. What are some of the things that you guys learned maybe that are not helpful when you're a missionary, especially when there's a language barrier like that?
I say that the best thing in my mind that I have learned that I would pass on is that the relationships between yourself as a male missionary and the young girls of the tribe, there's a lot of taboos that we didn't know. I didn't even realize until years later. My kids had to tell me this, to not look at a woman, not catch her eye, because that I was interested in her in their minds, and that there may even be something going on behind the scenes already because I caught her eye, and I didn't know that. And so the biggest thing I say is learn the culture well. And ask the right questions, find out what they understand. And that was just one little area. I'm sure we offended those people many, many times over.
But they're very gracious.
So gracious, they didn't tell us.
Wow.
don't think they ever in their life to this day would come back and say they were feeling like
No.
Gordy was bad or anything.
They probably would
like
never
that.
tell me that, but
they don't.
Yeah.
Because they started.
Well, they
realizing-
respected us anyway too, but still, I had to learn that with my kids telling me that this is a no, Dad.
Wow.
Nobody told me that,
I'm sure from their perspective, they wouldn't even realize that you might have a different culture than them from where you're from.
They would. The Manhui would think that you understand everything already.
Right.
So,
Wow.
and I think any tribe would be that way. When you first go into a tribe, and a lot of now we have very few tribes, you realize, Lauren, that are like this, that are so isolated. Almost all tribes now, we call them indigenous peoples of the world, will already speak more than one language. Very isolated. There's a few in Brazil still. I think there's a few in Indonesia.
But it's just not as bad as it was.
It won't be quite that bad, but still listen, pay attention, be aware, because it's easy to make mistakes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If we're here in maybe the States or any other Western country and we want to be a blessing to our missionaries, what are some of the things that they might need or ways that we could better serve them that maybe we don't realize?
Communication, probably the biggest thing.
No, but with
nowadays you got
it's easy
cell
to
phones and you can, So, but I don't. Still, people don't do it. I mean, but they like to hear from. We always like to hear from people, and I think that's probably one of the things. So
that's a good idea. Yeah,
get in touch. It's funny, Lauren, to think about it when we. How can I say?
We're so antiquated.
We look through our past through rose-colored glasses because we miss it, and it's so long ago kind of thing. And it's really interesting that we don't remember some of the harder times or whatever because like we were so well loved and taken care of by the people that did send us out that we didn't, And it was back when there wasn't a whole lot of communication. My firstborn son told me over the ham radio that he was going to get married.
Wow. Over a ham radio.
That's the only way we could communicate. Because letters, it took 2 to 3 weeks to get one because they have to go down to Paraguay and then they sit there for a while and then they get on a bus. They come up to the little town and then when somebody goes out, then they can get it.
It's with emails and cell phones now. Of course, we're learning that, we can communicate with our kids on the field. That we had, in fact, we were chatting with them yesterday, with just like what we're doing here, because
that's so neat
today. But imagine what that was like, without that, we don't even hardly realize it.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it is a big difference now. You can get in touch with people if things get maybe a little bit more dangerous with weather and things like that. Now we can actually get to people faster. So it was a different world before technology, which I'm sure is a blessing, but there are, I know, struggles that come alongside with that. Are these people, are they struggling with any of the sort of inappropriate things that come alongside internet usage?
They sure are.
Very definitely.
In fact, the government gave them a really nice gift, they thought. They gave them satellite, satellite television.
Oh.
And this has now been, I don't even know what it's like right now, but this was 10 years ago already. They gave them satellite TV, they gave them televisions, they gave them a power supply so they could run it. So they had television 24/7. And guess what happened? The kids weren't outside playing anymore. They were all sitting around these two television sets watching day and night. They weren't sleeping. They weren't eating.
Wow.
That's how fascinating it was. And now I think
it broke.
It finally, hopefully everything broke, but we don't know. Again, I think missionaries, if they're young missionaries, if they're hearing this or if they're going to become missionaries, I think probably still that communication and listening to what they're saying. And I mean, not just saying, how are you doing? Nice to see you, but listen to see what they really are concerned about.
And they take a long time to listen to. They're not like we are. We're kind of on our little schedules, whatever. And if somebody comes over to have coffee with you, you don't expect them to stay there for 3 hours. Well, it might take 3 hours for them to get around to what they want to share with you.
That's the Indians, yeah.
Wow. They don't have that schedule.
No, no. So the communication time is not the same. Yeah.
If we're dealing with missionaries that we can send things to, what sort of stuff would a family over there in different countries maybe need if we were able to send them packages?
I think you would have to probably ask the missionary families, because each one is going to be,
Each country is different.
yeah, and each country is different. Not just the sending of the package, but the needs. There's some places that have a lot of stuff, and like Paraguay is getting much more stuff than they used to have. And so I think it would be more asking them, what do you miss? What could you use that we could send you that would, go through customs, or that wouldn't do a lot to be able to get, or something like that.
Yeah, some customs, some airports in certain countries have regulations.
Yeah, and they won't let
They
you
won't even
send.
let certain things come in. So you
Well,
have to be
different.
careful. Yeah.
So I think I don't know.
We always appreciate, while we were there, we always would appreciate if somebody that was come to visit had brought a package of M&Ms or things that we, you couldn't get those down there.
Now you can.
Now you can. Always, not always.
Praise God.
It's things like that,
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. And just getting in touch with them and asking, because I
Absolutely.
had no idea the laws were different too for just each customs.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So you want to make sure that you're not actually making it harder for them to get a hold of things.
Yeah, because then they might get the package, and then it costs them an arm and a leg to get it out of the customs.
Oof. Yeah. That would actually be worse, not helpful. So yeah, that's great. That's helpful to know. When you guys got back over here, and not for the furloughs, but we're just maybe retiring, or whatever the word is for that, for missionaries, did you find that the church here in America had changed in a maybe more people pleasing kind of way, or when you got over here, was it similar to what you had experienced before?
Depends on the church, actually, in the area. Like here in North Idaho, it was pretty much what we'd seen, especially the church there that you mentioned, Jim Osman's church there in Kootenai, is pretty much been always the same. But we did notice that in other churches that we've attended, the emphasis on worship service for 5 minutes before the preacher got 15 minutes to speak, kind of thing. That's an over-exaggeration, but it seemed like there was way too much time spent on worship time and very little time spent on teaching.
And the importance of the Bible.
The Bible has just kind of gone out the window. It's like maybe one verse was mentioned a little bit, but the rest of it just
some places, but of course not in ours. But
yeah, we actually did take time to visit different churches before we actually settled down, and so that's why we were able to see that. But we've always appreciated the fact that the church we're in, they have an emphasis on the Word of God, and that's what drew us there. Is that?
Yeah. Wow. That is one of my pet peeve things that you mentioned, the large amount of music being played and then just the small amount of preaching. And I'm like, no, I'm so hungry for God's word. Please don't do that. And the electric guitars and the smoke machines. No, I can't handle that. I just want some simple songs.
Lauren, I love music. I love all that stuff. But I would rather watch it on YouTube at home.
Yes.
Turn my stereo on and listen to it at home. I don't need at church too,
entertainment.
Why do we want to be entertained in church?
Exactly.
We want to worship the Lord, and we want to grow in the Lord and learn what He has to.
So that's probably the biggest thing I think we've noticed. Is that.
Wow.
What is interesting, I've noticed that there's far more of a depth in the churches that do preach the word, teach the word. There's a lot better understanding than even we grew up with. So there's far more light, in a sense, in the churches that are preaching. But there's a little bit less light in the ones that are just paying attention to music and feel good stuff. A lot of feel good in a lot of the churches we've been in. And
fluff.
A lot of fluff.
Yeah, it is true. The depth with which these pastors are getting into and being able to explain it it's a tremendous blessing when you can find a good, solid church and really just learned so much in such a short period of time. I hate to shift to something so serious as this, but I do have one last question for you. I don't know if you guys know this, but there is actually a devastating split in the church that we're trying to fix here at Tulips and Honey. We're working our hardest, but there is a war basically under the guise of friendly pizza eating, where unfortunately some people are battling over whether or not pineapple belongs on pizza. So I would love to hear what y'all's opinion is of this very serious question.
Yes, pineapple goes on pizza.
It really goes well on pizza.
But it depends. If I'm doing it for my grandkids, no.
But they don't like it, huh? Okay.
They don't like sweet mixed with salty.
They don't. They don't like sweet beans. They don't like pork and beans. They grew up on the mission field where beans are salty.
Oh, that makes sense. That does make a difference. Right. Okay. Well, I really appreciate all of y'all's time that you've given me today. Before you guys head out, is there anything that we can be praying for you guys about, especially that long flight here in 6 weeks to get to visit? How can we be praying for you?
Well, maybe pray that we don't get COVID just before we go.
Definitely. Well, we'll definitely be praying for you guys for that and for your visit. I am so thankful that you guys were willing to talk with me about this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Humblebees, I hope that was a blessing for all of you listening. I know that their story has been just a tremendous blessing to me to get to see the lengths at which people have been willing to go to share the gospel all over the world. We have missionaries in all of the different countries, as many countries as we can get them to right now. There are missionaries. So in your church, if there are missionaries, hopefully this will encourage you guys to reach out to them, to be a blessing to them, to support them, if not financially, through prayer, through communication. And I'm so thankful for groups like Heartcry, Missionary Society, which is the group that my family supports. They do a tremendous job all over the country, all over the world, getting the gospel out. I love you all, Humblebees. I will see you all on Friday, Megalist Friday. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you don't miss that. If you are listening to a podcast and you want to leave a review, I don't think I've ever asked this, but apparently I am hearing that is helpful. If you guys want to subscribe and share and like and click all the buttons and then leave a review on different podcasting channels, that does somehow help. I don't really know the algorithm differences there, but there you go. That's helpful. And I will see you all on Friday. God bless you all, Humblebees. Bye.
Thanks for listening, Humblebees. This is Tulips and Honey. Over and out.
I think that diamond still needs a little more polish.
Yeah.
Paraguay. Is that right?
Yeah, sounds right.
Paraguay. I already forgot how to say it. The different. Now I can't even remember the word because, of course, words are just leaving my brain as soon as I try to think of them. The way that you had to write down how many were in the. I'm sorry. There.
Might want to edit that one.
So